at some point in our discussion, we talk about parents are afraid not to punish their kids because they're afraid the kids will grow up to be hooligans. Well, the quickest and most efficient way of raising children to become hooligans is to use a lot of aversive emotional and physical violence towards them. That does dramatically increase the odds that they'll be delinquent. But now that my colleague Mary Strauss has done longitudinal research and actually followed children over time, it becomes quite evident and quite clear that even very low levels of physical violence towards children, forms of corporal punishment that you wouldn't even look at twice in a supermarket, have aversive consequences for children in terms of cognitive development, in terms of the evolution of depression, in terms of the likelihood of being employed or unemployed. It's not simply the high-end forms of child abuse that everybody agrees is bad that have negative consequences for children. Even the more mundane, everyday, aversive behaviors that parents use towards kids do have negative consequences, and they accumulate rather rapidly. I mean, the evidence that kids have been harmed and their developmental potential undermined because of low levels of physical violence becomes available at 5 and 6 years of age. At every stage in a child's development, having been hit increases the likelihood the child will be violent. They don't just simply go into some latency period and then emerge as a violent adult. So that kids who are hit are more likely to hit their siblings. Kids who are hit are more likely to hit their playmates. Kids who are hit when they start dating are more likely to hit their dates. Kids who are hit when they get married are more likely to hit their partners. It's interesting that you can observe kids in a schoolyard, in a nursery school. And it's not just anger that produces their violent behavior, it's somebody else's pain. We've interviewed kids and interviewed parents and been able to identify which kids have been experienced the most physical punishment. And if, say, a classmate falls off a slide and skins their knee and starts crying, the child who's grown up in the violent home is often going to run up to the child who's crying and hit them. That they respond to others' distress not with compassion but with violence. That's a very distressing finding. It's not anger that's produced by the corporal punishment, but it's violence becomes a response to any kind of distress, not simply aversive anger-producing distress. I think the outward response of children who've experienced violence probably gets the most attention from policymakers and the media and the public. But the more insidious aspects of experiencing physical punishment may be the inward torment that it produces. The more kids who experience violence, the more likely they are to contemplate or commit suicide or attempt suicide. The more corporal punishment or violence they experience, the greater the likelihood they have of developing depression as a youngster, or adolescent, or an adult. And Professor Strauss's research is really quite compelling in terms of following people over time and showing that at time 1, if you experience corporal punishment, and we measure your cognitive abilities at time 1, and you continue to experience that corporal punishment, by time 2 your cognitive ability has gone down. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, I see kids that get spanked because they come home with bad grades. Well, Professor Strauss finds, no. The bad grades are the result of the spankings, and we can prove this by looking at kids over time. So there's a lot of inward torment and inward troubles that are produced by corporal punishment beyond the acting out of delinquency and violent behavior.
An additional usually unintended consequence of the use of physical punishment on children is that it is the children's emotional response, that it really creates feelings of fear in the child as well as feelings of anger toward the parent. And these emotions can have really disastrous consequences as the child grows up. A study by Strauss and Cantor of 6,000 families found that adolescents who had been physically punished were at higher risk for depression, for thoughts about suicide, for alcohol abuse, and they were also at greater risk for engaging in violence themselves, for engaging in spousal abuse and in beating their own children. Denial is a defense mechanism that helps protect people from unacceptable or overwhelming emotion or information. Now, for children, that has some very positive aspects, because children have much more limited cognitive and emotional capacities, and so traumatic events sometimes need to be isolated and compartmentalized off. The problem with denial, however, is that when it persists into adulthood, it can result in a whole range of different negative consequences. Research studies have shown, looking at cardiac patients or cancer patients, that when the patients are higher in their level of denial, which can involve either sort of outright denial that different things happened. Emotional intelligence is the term that psychologist Daniel Goleman has popularized, describing an awareness of one's emotions and the ability to manage those emotions. And he documents in a series of studies that indicate that what he calls emotional illiteracy, which we would actually call denial, is associated with a whole range of problems, including conflict in the workplace, higher divorce rates, aggressiveness, drug abuse, violence, and spousal abuse resulting from childhood experiences of abuse. Goleman argues that a emotional relearning or retraining is necessary to enhance one's emotional intelligence, and psychotherapy, he suggests, is one tool for this kind of relearning.
Trauma, including physical abuse or physical punishment in childhood during that early developmental stage, produces permanent changes. For example, decreasing the volume of the hippocampus. That's a brain structure that's very important in memory. And other brain structures may be influenced as well. And also the release of neurotransmitters or chemicals that take a signal or a bit of information from one cell to the next. The secretion of neurotransmitters in the brain is altered as a result of trauma. So these are all really serious changes in brain chemistry and anatomy that you could expect if someone is traumatized early in childhood. It's sort of funny, we often have a lot of sympathy for adults who've been traumatized in war, in prisoner of war situations, and we marvel at the fact that they can manage to survive that sort of treatment. But children, we treat them sometimes as if they were pieces of furniture. We bang them around. You see parents who lift a child by an arm, or who push a child and the child falls into a wall or a table. Sometimes there's actual organic brain damage if parents hit a child over the head or around the head. But even without that actual physical damage to the brain, the effect of trauma, of the terror and uncertainty of living with physical abuse and physical punishment, is these changes in the brain that then presumably have an effect later on in adulthood. As an adult, someone who's been physically punished in childhood may react to a minor stressor with this, what we call autonomic overreactivity. They're stressed and harassed all of the time, and they tend to react to small things like their own children spilling milk becomes the source of this tremendous rush of energy, increase in heart rate, and the parent may respond to this minor incident as if it were a major problem, major life and death threat.